So just wanted to remind everyone, the trainings, every webinar is recorded and will be available on the Curator platform within 24 hours. So yesterday's session is already available today in the Curator platform. So if you missed anything or you want any refreshers, please feel free to rewatch the video. All right. So today's session is about your role as a manager, and we will talk about how to identify the core competencies of a good manager. Let me share my screen so you can see the goals here. How to understand the differences between management and leadership. How to examine situational leadership. Identify the challenges of remote management. And also understand inclusive management and to establish how to avoid expressing bias. Okay. We ended our last session talking about the things that a manager does and the roles that they play. So conflict resolution, delegation, being a good communicator, rewarding, those are all things that we talked about yesterday. And on this slide, we share what we see as the core competencies for being a good manager. And again, most of these were on the list from yesterday. And these are the key things that jump out every time we have these conversations with folks about what makes a good manager. These are the key things that stand out. When you think about the competency areas on the list, do you think of them as most applicable to managers and leaders, or how do these lists apply to both? Does anybody see a difference between manager and leaders just from this list? You can open your mic. There's no right or wrong answer. This is a safe space. Feel free to share your thoughts. Do you think there's a difference between a manager and a leader and the skill sets that they need to have? Go ahead, Susie. Thank you so much.
I would say they're absolutely intertwined. I mean, a manager is a leader on their team, right? They're leading the people that they are overseeing. So I think they're very much woven together.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Let me just check the chat. Perfect. Yeah, if we look at it, there's a lot of connection between being a manager and being a leader, right? So let's look at the list identifying some differences between management and leadership. And as you look at these characteristics, think about to what extent is your job more to the left or to the right of the column. Nowadays, as managers, we need to develop the skills to move between both of these, right? So for example, we need to inspire trust in order to build a good foundation, to have a good relationship and be able to manage our team. We also need to have systems and control to know when to be a boss and give that executive decision, or have organizational processes, right? And also provide questions of asking why, what, and why, and help facilitate that open environment of being inclusive. So we shift from these all the time, and they're needed. So leadership is about having a vision to guide change by thinking ahead, motivating others, and making challenges an opportunity for change. Managers focus on achieving organizational goals through procedures, budgets, focusing on staff, and just the bottom line, right? But they both complement each other. You don't have one without the other. You can inspire, but then you could be a hot mess when you're trying to implement that inspiration or that task, and then you get nowhere, right? You don't know how to get that off the ground. You can then be very strict, have a lot of good procedures, know how to hire the right people, but then if you don't know how to motivate them, you won't get them to get started on stuff. So it's a balance of having both, right? So we're gonna do a little exercise, and we're gonna use a bonus little reflection. So let's look at our competencies descriptions in your workbook and complete the SWOT strength, weakness, or areas of improvement, opportunity, and threats chart, and use this to make a plan, maybe even the competency list to start open and honest conversations with your manager on direct reports about areas that you need to focus your growth on or areas that you have strengths. Okay, so we're going to take about 4 minutes and we're going to open our workbooks and we're going to talk about strength, weakness, opportunities for threats. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing real quick so I can see your faces. So this is going to be on page 10 of your workbook. If you haven't downloaded the workbook, I'll put a link real quick again so that you could have access. Hold on, I'll share the link. Hold on, I can't see my little chat button. Yes, I will show the slide. Perfect. Miranda just shared the workbook slide and I'll show the slide of the competencies. And this is going to be on page 10 of your workbooks. Okay, so I'm going to show the chart again. We're going to take 4 minutes. Just turn off your cameras. We're not going to be in groups. I'm going to put a timer on. I might play a little music in the background to set the mood. And then I will share the list again. All right. It was loud. My headphones were low volume. And then I was chatting with Miranda, is the volume okay? And then I realized my volume was too high. So I apologize if that was more distracting than soothing. So my apologies for that. Perfect. All right. So how was that? Who wants to share? How did it feel? Did this tool help you carve out the time to think about you and where your strengths are and where you may need more support or what new skills you need to learn? How did that make you all feel? Was it easy?
Easy. Sorry, my voice is really hoarse. I've been coughing.
No worries. Thank you, Joy.
Yeah. So I think it's a very good self-reflection. It makes you understand things that you never really thought would even hinder what you're supposed to be doing. Because when I was looking at my weaknesses, I was like, I actually do that. You know, because one of the things like for my weaknesses is I want to do so many things at the same time. And then in the end, I end up not really finishing properly and then end up frustrated because I did not prioritize well. So I think that is a big weakness that I need to work on. At least I'm glad that I'm a good delegator. I'm a motivator. I'm quite organized, even when I try to do all the tasks together at the same time. Yeah, so it gives this very good self-reflection as you are going through that. You know, because every time when you're doing the SWOT analysis, you're looking at other factors, not really yourself. So having to look at yourself was very enlightening. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else? I know Deborah said definitely helpful. We'll need more time to consider and we'll need input of others to consider more deeply. For sure. This is just to honestly to scratch the surface and to allow you to build the habit of carving out time to have this self-evaluation, right? And thought process about yourself and how you also want to lead your team, but where are you at and having that check-in with yourself. So yes, definitely it's a tool that you can definitely use not only for yourself, but for your team. It's a great tool to help them also analyze and understand where they are and what might they need from you. Susie, it's interesting to think about the progression of weaknesses into threats, isn't it? Then you realize where it could be a problem, right? Very interesting, needs more time for self-evaluation. Yes, we all do. Listen, we're super busy, right? When we're at work, we're like focused, we're trying to manage different things, the projects, the people, but sometimes we need to have time to reflect on us and what is it that we need and how we can be the best leaders that we can be. So this is, again, to start that habit of carving out time, whether it's in the morning before you start your day, separate from your to-do list, right? Or at the end of the day to see how the day went and reflect on the day. It's really studying that time for yourself. Okay. Perfect. Again, this is just to help you start thinking of where you are. And as we talk about situational leadership, how to set good remote working habits and systems, and how to address and prevent bias. So this little exercise is just honestly a good foundation for everything else that we're going to cover. Cool. Anybody else want to share anything or any other thoughts? Okay. It wasn't easy, right? I know it's not easy for me either. But we are working on it. All right. So this is an interesting exercise. Actually, the chart I'm going to share with you right now. All right. So we're going to talk about the situational leadership model. And this is from Hershey and Blanchard Situational Leadership. And basically what it is at the core, people want to feel seen, right? So many of the qualities you raised about a good manager get at this. Good manager uses a variety of skill sets and qualities to understand each individual's direct reports and make them feel that they're seen and heard. So in other words, the question, how do I manage this person? It depends, right? There isn't a one size fits all model, and it depends on the person. It depends on the situation. It depends on how everybody's feeling that day and what transpired. So one of the key theories around the it depends management or leadership approach was developed in 1970s by Hershey and Blanchard, called situational leadership. And the core premise is that managers and leaders need to adapt their leadership style to the individual and the situation. So look at all good, again, there are various management modules, and this module is based on a 4-box matrix, right? So along the x-axis is the low to high directive behavior. It's how much direction you as a manager need to give the individual you're working with. So keep in mind, this is not only dependent on the person, but also the task being performed. Some tasks with some individuals may need a lot of direction, especially if it's a new task being done. And then the other task need maybe less direction if it's something that they've done several times and you've coached them on. Okay. Along the y-axis is the low to high supportive behavior. So how much do you need to support that individual in a socio-emotional way? And do they have the confidence to deliver the task? Do they have the willingness to deliver the task? Do they like what they're doing? Or do you need to help them get access to other managers or other resources for them to complete the task? So again, from delegating, this is what you need to do, run with it, to supporting how hands-on do you need to be. Okay, so just like directive behavior, it will depend on the task and in the situation of the individual and the individual. So we really can plot a staff member's journey with the role for any given task if it goes through a high directive behavior, so an A to B to C, through the less directive and more supportive. So you've done this before, you can do it again. Perhaps you need a little extra support. Perhaps you just need to bounce off ideas. It's different on what you need with the situation. So low direction all the way through to low direction is high support, right? So if you're delegating and you need low direction and they don't need a lot of your support, you're delegating. If you're doing a lot of coaching and then a lot of, you're telling them exactly what to do and you're directing. So again, every task moves through this, every situation, every evaluation situation. And this is not only for our staff person, so an individual in your team, this is also for your team. And we'll be talking about the progression of a team as well, how you move through different stages, right? A new team might be all in the delegating stage. They might be getting to know each other. They don't know everybody's roles, strengths, and weaknesses. Then they all feel some confidence and they move through the curve. Okay. So again, we can clearly see at the bottom right hand of the square that there's a high directive and low supportive behavior. So that you're directing, sometimes referring to as telling someone what to do, right? You're being that direct boss. In the top right hand of the box, we're doing a little bit more coaching, helping them understand why and how, by letting them take the initiative. On the top left box, we're lowering the amount of direction and we're giving, but we are maintaining high support level with the working and building their confidence, which is really important. And the last box, we're doing very low support and very low directing. And this is where you can delegate tasks freely, right? This is where you can really delegate and just have a check-in once a week or at the end of the project and just ask how it's going. But your staff members and your team need to build that trust. And you need to have that trust in them to do the job, okay? So think about where you fit in this role. Consider that it will depend on what you're doing. Some tasks or roles you're in depends on the employee that you're working with. So it all just fluctuates, okay? I'm gonna stop sharing my screen real quick. So we're gonna do an activity. And Marinda, by the way, just shared a link in the chat to have some additional information about situational leadership if you want to explore that a little more. Thank you, Marinda. Perfect. So we're going to do a little activity. We are going to take about 7 minutes. And in your groups, you're going to have a discussion around, think of a member, think about an area you or a member of your staff or a manager, if you don't supervise anyone right now, have been struggling with. Perhaps there's an area of friction around something. And then we're going to use the annotate to, actually, sorry, let me go back to the chart here. Let's practice this. Oh, I just lost mine. Perfect. All right, I am going to share real quick. Sorry about that. All right, so we're going to go into an activity, and in your groups, you're going to discuss how you feel about this framework and how you might be able to use it within your teams. So there's not going to be a really long group session. It's going to be about 7 minutes. And Marinda is going to put you into groups, and it's just getting to know this framework and how you feel within your structure, within your individuals you supervise or the teams that you're leading or part of. This structure, this new model can help you. Okay. So Marinda's going to give me the thumbs up in a moment.
Okay, ready?
Perfect. We will see you in 7 minutes.
There you go. Remember to unmute when you're in your groups.
Yes. All right. So welcome back. Anybody want to share how it went in your group? Was it helpful? Was it not? Have you never seen situational leadership? Go ahead, Susie. Thank you so much.
Sorry to jump in again first.
Please.
I just really appreciate the opportunity to have discussions about these things, because I think that having shared experience and discussing how we handled it or what issues we can relate to is super helpful. So it was really, really rich to have even a short discussion.
Yeah, no, and I love it. Thank you so much for pointing it out. And again, this is also for you to understand that you probably have been using this model. You just never knew what it was called, or there was such a model. So a lot of these things we're doing, but now it's being put into a model, into a definition. It's giving it some structure and content that we now can call it by something. So thank you so much. And yeah, again, this is about having that time to reflect and carving out that space. With that said, we're going to do a quick little exercise. And I want you to think of a situation that you're currently going through, either with a staff member, a team, your supervisor. And let's use the annotate tool that I'm going to share on my screen real quick. And we're going to see where we are on this curve. Now that you had a moment to reflect on this, just so we can see where you are. So just if you go to the annotate under more, a little more options, you'll see the annotate, and then you can use the stamps. There's a star, there's a happy face, there's a check mark. So think of that situation and then use the annotate tool to plot yourself in that graph that we have right now.
Could you give those directions again? Where are they?
Oh,
In the
sorry.
annotate.
So there's 3 little dots on the bottom of the
Uh-huh.
same toolbar where it's your mute button and your video.
Yeah.
And then if you click on the 3 little dots, you will see halfway through the option for annotate.
Yes.
And
But once we get there.
there you're gonna see
Oh, stamp.
yes, under stamps, and then you can
Thank
pick
you.
the heart, the star, the question mark.
I think I don't have that option. Even yesterday I was looking.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, me too. I don't have it either.
Okay, so if you don't see that option, then on the chat, just put which quadrant you're on. Technology is not a barrier to sharing experiences or information.
You can also try if you have a view options button at the top. If you drop that arrow box, there's also annotate on there.
Mhm.
It's different, maybe. Sorry to.
No, that's
interrupt.
perfect, Miranda. My view is different because I'm sharing the slides too. But thank you for the chat too. Support. So for the folks that
Yeah,
put
the view
the
works.
annot-
Thank you.
Oh, it worked awesome.
Yeah.
So for those of you that put that you're in the delegating stage, do you see how you can transition that particular situation with that staff member or team into the other categories where you might be then supporting and then coaching and then directing? Does anybody that put it on delegating want to talk about that real quick? Okay, we're gonna be shy today. I got you. That's okay. It's early for some of you too. Not enough coffee. But the whole point is that you see how you need to move that situation through the curve so that eventually you're not constantly at that delegating stage, right? Because if you're constantly having to delegate to, I'm sorry, not delegate, but providing that support to someone where you're directing and supporting all the time, then you're kind of doing their job for them, right? So you do want to get to this point of delegating and directing as much as possible, where you become a sounding board, where you become a person, you ask them for their ideas and their solutions, and you're not constantly directing them and telling them what to do all the time. Okay. Awesome. All right. So the idea of situational leadership shows us how important it is to understand where each individual is in their journey and to understand members of your team. And this can even be more challenging in a remote environment. And this is more difficult to see people struggling. It's hard for us to ask for help, and there's no one around you that you can call. You won't run into someone in the kitchen. You won't run into someone in the hallway. You won't see someone with their door closed in their office all the time to kind of give you some signs about what's happening, right? So some of us went from working with our colleagues in person to now having our children, our spouses, our pets become our new workmates. So how do we navigate all that, not only for ourselves, but for our teams, right? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we are going to use our chat feature right now to just, on a scale of 1 to 10, being 1 being I hate it, and 10 being I love it, tell me about how much you like working remotely. A 5, a 10. Yeah, it works for a lot of people, and for some people, it's honestly it doesn't. I've seen a 1, so I'm not surprised. Not in this group yet, but in other groups. Yeah, it depends, right, on the situation. It also depends on your task that you're doing. Sometimes it is easier to be around people. So now I want you to put in the chat, what does your staff need from you now that you're all remote than before, if you were in person? Regular intentional check-ins. I love that, Susie. Intentional. This remote hybrid environment has actually force us to have more intentional and less casual connections and conversations. Again, that water cooler talk that they used to call it, right? That running in the kitchen or the hallway. Clear and regular communication, frequent check-ins, yep. Informational updates, task management, yeah. It's the regular intentional connection. And that's honestly a theme that we've seen throughout. And how do we keep that connection? How do we keep engaged? And how do we keep building relationships through this new method and way of working? Kelly, weekly stand-ups, open, honest about boundaries. Yes, encouragement on taking time off and taking care of ourselves. Yes, I do want to talk about that. And thank you for bringing that up, Kelly, because now we all work from home. It's not only hard to set those boundaries, right? When do you clock off and when do your family life starts, but it's also, when do we need to take a sick day or a mental health day, right? Because it's all here. So you're like, yeah, I'll just check an email later. I'll do the report later, but that's not a good habit for us to have, right? When you're sick, you need to be sick. Even if you work remote, call out sick, take the time off, heal yourself, right? And then come back refreshed the next day. So don't blur those lines for yourself, because then you'll also unfortunately start blurring those lines for your staff. So encourage them. Hey, listen, if you're sick, you're sick. Even if you're working remote, you need to go to a doctor's appointment, take the time, go to a doctor's appointment. You know, your child is sick or your family member sick, take that time off. Okay. And sometimes we don't do that because we can just get to it later because our office is in our home now. Okay. Something we'll talk about later, but something that I started doing recently to create some boundaries and separation between work schedule and home schedule is, at the end of the day, but I'll go around and take a walk around the block. So that transition that before we used to have from commuting, a lot of us commuted and we had the quiet time on the train or in our cars, whatever it was, we had that time to disconnect. So do some type of habit that allows you to disconnect. Turning off the computer, putting it away in another place, moving it to another room, something that allows you to have a physical transition and have that separation between work and family time. Okay, and encourage your teams to do the same. Yeah, Sumar, it honestly, it is. It's something so basic and we take it for granted. Sometimes I'll just start cooking. I'll do whatever it is to have that transition. And it helps with that balance is super critical, Felix. Okay. So remote management has many benefits. You're not restricted by geographical locations. People don't have to travel for work. You're not restricted by time zones, and there are less distractions, which can allow you to get more work done and a lot of flexibility, right? So those are one of the pluses. However, it does mean that as a manager, you might need to take an approach that is different from how you would if you were sitting next to someone in your team or running, into them in the hallways. So through the Humantum partnership, all the partners that we work with, there was a survey that we put out, and based on the feedback from the thought leaders in those areas, we put together, again, by no means a huge list, but some competencies and skills that we think need to be prioritized in today's remote and hybrid world. And we're going to spend more time exploring how we need to be contextualizing these competencies and skills to a remote work environment, and what habits we can start to form to make them stick. Again, most of you have been working remotely for a while now. Some are hybrid, some will permanently be virtual. This is a great exercise to reflect on how it's going and what are some shifts that you need to make or reinforce the things that are working. Okay. Again, not everyone is comfortable with technology. Not everyone is still comfortable with what mechanisms we use to communicate quickly with each other, to meet. People have so much virtual meetings, they're done with them. So personally, I started doing phone calls, especially if I already talked to the person several times during the week on Zoom and seen them. I'll be like, let's just hop on the phone and have a conversation, right? So change it up for yourself too, and for others, especially if you already had that contact. So I'm going to share my screen because we're going to work in a Google Doc that Marinda is going to share the link to in the chat. And I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to try to zoom it in real quick because it creates a problem. Perfect. So you're going to be looking at a similar slide like this. It's a Google Doc. You're going to be put into groups that have different names. So pay attention to your group name. And what we're going to talk about is just some of these competencies. So for example, so there's a priority competence and skills around virtual facilitation for meeting and presentations. And then also proficiency in digital tools and standardized digital processes. And then what are some competencies? And then what are some habits that we can put together? So what do you need to have virtual facilitations for meetings? And then what are some habits that we can have to feel that connection turning on our cameras? Right? Something so simple. So we're going to have different categories. There's going to be a category around, let me look real quick. There's going to be a digital category. There's going to be a, what is the category? Hold on, there we go. That's on my, there's going to be a digital proficiency, meeting deliverables, communication, and culture. There's going to be 3 different groups or 3 different areas rather. And then you're going to be giving the priority competency and skill. Feel free to add more. And then we want you to go through the exercise of completing the competency column and then the habits column. And you're going to have about 12 minutes to do this in your groups. So again, when you're putting to groups, your group will be named something, either digital, communications, meeting deliverables, communication and culture, or digital proficiency. And then you're going to work together and discuss and record your key points. Again, don't get caught up in technology. Not everyone needs to have access. Just one person can access the document and share the screen, and then can be the person typing if you are unable to access the document. This tool was based on the Neuro Leadership Institute of 3 components of behavior change, priorities, habits, and systems. So the team organizations need to agree on what their priorities are to work on creating change, and then building the right habits and having systems to support the right habits and priorities. Let me give you another example. Having all your documents on an electronic shared drive. Again, you're no longer in your offices. No one needs the files, the hard files for any type of situation. So if you don't have a system that allows you to have an electronic shared drive, then people can't do their work, right? So again, it's what do you need to operate? What are the tools that you need? And how do you create these habits and making sure that you have those systems? Any questions so far?
Could you repeat what this is based on, please?
Yeah, so this is, and we're going to put it in, we'll put it on the chat. This is based on the Neuro Leadership Institute, and it's based on behavior change, priorities, habits, and systems. And I'll put the link in the chat, so if you want to read more about it. But this information came about a survey that Humentum did with all its partners. Oh, thank you, Marinda. That Humentum did with all its partners were identified where the key components or competencies around virtual and remote working were identified. So we did a little survey for you all. Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can see your faces because my screen minimizes.
I had a quick question
Yes,
about
please.
the slides. So when we go into the groups, are we focused mainly on slides 2, 3, and 4? Or
Yes.
are we going, okay. Just those.
So the slides,
Mhm.
the group slides start on slide 6. At the
Okay.
bottom, there's a green little box on the bottom that says, for example, digital 1 on slide 6. That's the group number. That's the group name.
Got it.
And then when you go to slide 9 is deliverable. That's the meeting deliverables group. And then when you go to slide 12, that's the communications group. So pay attention to the group that you're going to be put on. Marinda just put them in the chat. So if you're in group 1, your digital, your group 2, your deliverables, group 3, communications, group 4, your digital, group 5, your deliverables, group 6, communications. And is there 7 groups, Marinda, or 6?
Sorry, 6 groups.
Perfect. Okay. If you have any questions, I'll be going in and popping in, so don't mind me, but you can always come back to the main room and ask questions. So again, look at the competencies that are there. Feel free to add more and think about what are the ways that these competencies can be reached, and then what are some habits. So what resources do you need? And then what are the habits that we can put in place? All right. We will see you in 12 minutes.
Perfect. Here you go.
Isn't that the $1 million question?
But Deborah, you should take note of that. Internet connectivity can hamper communication.
The question is, who doesn't have issues with internet connectivity?
No one.
Awesome. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining back. If we can have, we're going to highlight and have someone from the digital proficiency, the 2 groups, if someone wants to just talk to us about some key things that stood out for you. Just give us some highlights. We're going to go through each group or each category. Oh, don't be shy.
I can kick us off. So with the digital proficiency team, we basically said that we recognize that over the course of the pandemic, we've had to grow in different skills that we otherwise wouldn't have needed to because of the pandemic. And so that has to some degree led us to be more efficient. However, there's still some needs and areas that we need to standardize and think about as it relates to the use of platforms and making sure that all of our team members feel proficient in using those platforms, and that we're mindful also of etiquette related to meetings and gatherings and empathy towards those that may be in a household where there's a lot of commotion going on, things of that nature. And so that's what I would say are like the top items that we discussed in our group.
That is awesome. I love that, because sometimes we don't think about other people. We just think about us and our bubble. And we don't think about some issues that folks may have, like they might not know a software, they might not know a platform, and we're expecting them to work through it and then wonder why they are not engaging the way we want them to engage. So awesome. Thank you for that. Alexis, you had your hand up?
Yeah, so I was in the other digital proficiency group, and it mirrors what Samara was saying heavily. I think one of the, and then the internet issue came up. I heard when I came back from my group, that was a topic that you guys were talking about. But I think it is the etiquette thing. It's like sending reminders and, giving people space to understand the expectations, and training. It's the one thing, we assume that everybody knows how to use these digital tools. Somebody like me on the operations side who is an implementer of tools, it's easy for me to just move into a new system. But when you've got subject matter experts that are focused on something else, that's not where they have space. So it's creating time too, I think, for that, and making that a priority for your organization.
I think that's perfect. And sometimes we implement all these tools, but we don't allow the time for adequate training or onboarding, or getting feedback, right, of what's working and what's not. We're just like, all right, this is what management says, and let's run with it. Where's everybody else in the process? Another thing is that a lot of our organizations are worldwide. So we may not think about others' access and affordability to internet. So creating policies and procedures, especially where remote and you're no longer having field offices, what does that mean for folks across the globe that we work with, right? The internet is very expensive in other parts of the world. It may not be reliable in other parts of the world as reliable as here. So scheduling meetings around that time, or making sure that you're possibly, if you can, reimbursing them or using platforms that are more reliable. Like when we all first started working international, Skype was like the thing, right? We all used Skype. And then we evolved to like Zoom and then WhatsApp and things to that effect. So think about the countries that we work in and their infrastructures and networks is very important too, as we're making these implementations within our teams and organizations. Awesome. Thank you so much for both of you sharing. How about the meeting deliverables? You can just open your mic, whoever was in those two groups.
Yep, I can go.
Perfect.
So we had a lot to say on the setting clear expectations for how and when to communicate in order to maintain an appropriate work-life balance one. And we said using clear structured agendas for meetings, including their purpose, clarifying on timing and what boundaries of a workday look like, and really within the habit side of that, modeling that behavior. Regular use of chat tools for quick check-ins, no internal meetings on Fridays, refrain from work outside of your working hours, and, including deep work blocks on your calendar if needed to ensure that you're not being sucked into meetings all the time and you can actually focus on the work outside of those as well.
Yeah, that's great. Because if not, you have like a second shift, right? The non-meeting time at night, no one's bothering you, then you have to catch up on all the work that you couldn't get to because you've been in meetings all day, every day. Yeah, so I've worked in organizations where we've implemented that twice a week, those 2-hour, 3-hour time blocks for people to just have focused time. So if you wanted to, send emails, that was on you, but do not expect a response for that time block. Do not expect people are we should not be hosting meetings. So we did that as well. It worked very well. But then again, then people were like, well, no, we need to make an exception because I'm off tomorrow. And then we need to make an exception. So it doesn't work if there's a lot of exceptions, because then you're still, then you're not thinking of other people's and how that impacts them. So those are great ideas. Agendas and not meeting just to meet, especially now where we're all Zooming all the time, is so critical. So I follow up with folks right before. I'm like, do we still need to have a check-in? Like do you have something on your list that you need to discuss? Because if we don't, then I'm okay. Like, we're good. We can focus that time and use it for something else. So definitely do that. Yes, deep work time is a tough one. Yes, a lot of the time those are booked over in practice. Yeah. Yes. And try to set 15-minute meeting blocks, right? Before we used to do 30 minutes, go for those 15 minutes, especially if those are the quick check-ins. It helps move things along and not make a huge agenda where everybody's like, okay, so what's next? And what's next? And nobody talks. All right, awesome. Thanks. Thank you, Kelly. How about the communications and culture? What were some highlights from that?
Our group said that everything really comes down to being more proactive about communication. So quick questions or non-work related conversations are always going to be more difficult, not in person. For listening skills, we said there actually are more distractions being remote. It's harder to be present in a meeting when there's Teams messages coming through your meeting or you have your phone right next to you. So it's another thing we need to be proactive about and just be more present in every meeting. And for conflict resolution, we mentioned there could be miscommunication without seeing someone's facial expressions. So whether it's around conflict resolution or just daily meetings, it's important to have frequent face-to-face interactions with your camera on.
Yes, as much as we can. So like I always say, be professional on the top, all fun and business, not business on the bottom. So at least, your camera presentable, right? So you feel comfortable to opening up your camera. Yeah, believe it or not, reminding everyone, like I did, like we do at the beginning of our workshops. So making sure you turn on your camera if you can, making sure you set the space, minimize those windows, mute your phone for a moment. It does help to create that habit and people will start doing it. And also at the end of the day, multitasking is not the right, it's not healthy actually for your brain or your body to just be juggling so many things. It's actually single tasking. So we've been taught wrong all this time, right? Praising multitaskers when it's single tasking what we need to do so we could be good at that one thing, finish it, and then move on to that other thing, right? And not have to revisit it again, because then that doesn't help with productivity. So awesome. Thank you all for sharing. These are amazing. You can access, this is the link to the Google Doc. Feel free to go back, see what your other colleagues put in those other categories. Take that with you, share within your groups, your teams, and your organizations, and see how maybe you can create some change or it affirms some things that you're already doing. So feel free to explore this Google Doc farther. So thank you all so much for that. So we talked a little bit about, we just talked about working remote and the importance of recognizing the impact of not considering this challenge for your team and others around. But what about unconscious bias? That's something that we can struggle with even more, right? How important is it to read that body language, someone's intent in that email, right? So we're not gonna, oh, where's the link to the Google Doc? Marinda will put it again for you, Angela. So just real quick in the chat, what is unconscious bias to you? What is your definition of unconscious bias? Just give me 1 or 2 words.
Francesca, as a definition or examples?
Definition. What do you think unconscious bias is? And if you don't want to chat, you want to open your mic and you feel comfortable, please open your mic. We don't want to limit the interaction. So Andrea says biases that you don't realize you have. Yeah. So it's a prejudice that is present but not consciously held or recognized. Unintentional bias, being biased towards one or more staff members of the team without realizing it. Yep. Assumptions being made on experiences, right? And situations, unknowingly treating someone differently based on whatever factors may have happened. So the question is, how does it affect your organization and our work? Who wants to open their mic? No, not aware of one's own bias, right?
Well, it affects our communication. It affects our interaction. And it affects everybody, but not in the same way, because we all have our own unconscious bias. So, and we don't all know what our own unconscious bias is, let alone what somebody else's is. So it complicates things.
Right, and it takes growth and reflection and knowledge, right, to a degree, to then break some of this or to realize you've had a bias. Perfect. Kelly, and then Allison.
Yeah, so I think an example has been, we actually at Humantum have started including pronouns in our email signatures and in Slack usernames, because I think we all make assumptions on people's pronouns. It's something we go back and forth on though, because including it, does that make anybody feel pressured to include it if they aren't ready to share? So I think we don't have a perfect answer to it yet, but I think that's an example of something that we can make assumptions on without knowing.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah, just because you want to make sure everyone feels seen or heard or identified, then are you putting pressures on folks that are not ready? And that's great. I honestly hadn't even thought about all that through. So that's perfect. Thank you for sharing. Allison?
Yeah, and I think we're all aware of the harm and danger in unconscious bias, but I think one of the things is, like, if you are prioritizing giving somebody a project because you think, oh, they'll really like it, it's really fun, but you don't realize because of your unconscious bias that somebody else might be better suited for it, you're just harming the overall
Yes.
dynamic of the team, and your goals are going to suffer for it. So
Yeah, so it's those the preconceived biases or stereotypes that we have and carry. We think, oh, I get along better with this person, I can talk to them more freely, even though they're not the best qualified. Somebody else is that might be a little more challenging to work with in your team, right? That's something that happens often, believe it or not. So why is being considerate of these differences still such a challenge for us in the 21st century, right? Because we're still dealing with inherited stereotypes and biases. Passing comments can stick in our minds. We can grow up with labeling to help us understand and digest the world, which is important for a child to deal with, you know, just the world around them and understanding and not feeling overwhelmed. But it is how the media and even our own nurturing creates those definitions for us. And this continues through our lives that then creates these biases later. So that's why I was saying education, information, experiences shift and educate us on what is bias and what something that we were brought up with thinking or speaking a certain way is actually not the right way, right? Of doing and carrying ourselves. So as a manager, the opposite of being inclusive is also being dismissive, right? That was the example of like, I don't want to deal with that problematic person that I have a hard time dealing with. So we're not going to try to work together and assign projects. Being dismissive is just as bad. Okay. So we use our stereotypes and biases to be dismissive of people, and in some ways use it as a way to excuse both our reactions and their contributions. And this is not limited to those who are different from us. Women have these biases about other women. Those of ethnic cultures have different biases of their own nationalities. I mean, it just happens, right? It is hard to rewire, but it's important to bring the unconscious to the conscious. So again, being intentional. And we're not perfect, and being gracious enough to understand that we can evolve as people and grow and learn and have open dialogue, right? So how do we do this? So again, there are week-long trainings just on inclusion and bias. So this is going to help us recognize that there are bias in our organizations. And sometimes we can be biased, but the key is how do we change this? So I have a moment for a quick example. So a bias. I worked at an organization that, believe it or not, our executive director was a woman, but she did not want to allow people that had children. This was before COVID, where remote work now is pretty like the norm, right? That people that had children, especially women that had children, to work remote from home. Because in her mind, she thought that a woman that had children would just not work, but then do just childcare. So she would not allow, she would allow other people, men or single people. And it was very evident, like it was very clear. It wasn't because the person demonstrated responsibility and could be reliable and trusted to work remote, right? It was, the criteria was, do they have a child or not? Which was really hard. And as an administrator, right, I'm overseeing HR and all that, it was very challenging to then justify that, because then it was perceived as favoritism. So what I had to do is then I also had to work with her and say, you know, that's not really what we need to be focusing on. We created a policy, a procedure that was very clear on the expectations around people working remote, how to request it. So it became a formalized process, and it had nothing to do with whether you had children or not. People earned it based on the work that they were doing. Not all work at that time could have been done remote because of our systems didn't allow for that. But also it was just more about the person and how responsible they were and how trusted we felt. And then put some ownership on the supervisor to make sure that the work that was supposed to be done remote was completed. But it took a shift. It took a very big shift for our executive director to understand that that was biased and kind of illegal at the same point, you know? So it was making that shift. And as a mid-management supervisor, it was very challenging for me to kind of have that conversation and say, you know, that's not the right way to go about it. And then create some policies and procedures and create a standard so it allowed everyone some equality. But it was hard. It was a hard conversation because it was an old school mindset and experience based on her experiences of what was happening before during her time as a professional. So it, like I said, it still happens, and it's hard for us at mid-management to try to address some of these shifts and changes that need to happen in our organizations. But having those conversations are very important. And if you have a very challenging leadership, it's getting creative on how to create that change without having them feel attacked or wronged as well, right? Because then you got to manage their own feelings about the process. I'm not being prejudiced. I'm not having bias. And then you're gonna be like, but yeah, you are. So you create policies that standardize things. So again, that's been my experience. And Felix asked, what is the line between unconscious bias and discrimination? Some people don't know that. Pretty much discrimination is just really when you're deliberately not hiring someone or not giving opportunities or promotions to someone that they merit and warrant based on any type of gender, disability, being pregnant, anything like that. That's really where that line is. That becomes a labor law issue. Every country has a little bit of different labor laws, but mostly it's like that. You don't take away someone's chance or opportunity because of their ethnicity, their race, their gender, their religion, or disability. As long as they can do the job and they have the skills, they can get the promotion, they can get hired. So there's also workshops on like what not to say during interviews. You'd be surprised. You cannot ask people about if they're married, if they have children, when they're planning to get pregnant. I mean, like so many things. But people, believe it or not, some people still do that. Can unconscious bias contribute to discrimination? Yes. People that think that women, hiring women executives, and I've seen this, could be potentially, she's in her reproductive years, quote unquote, and would be probably having to take leave. And so they don't want that because they want someone there all the time. And I've heard that personally. So yeah, there is bias. Someone that may look young, it's also based on appearances as well. And there's a fine line with that, but mostly about women and their reproductive years, which is crazy because now there's paternity leave, right? But no one doesn't hire men for that. So don't get me started. Like I said, there's a whole another workshop on all this. But let's focus on what are the things that we can do as managers and as leaders? Where do we have the opportunity to include rather than exclude? How can you and your team take steps to be more aware of when you make when you may be expressing bias, and what can you do to check on each other's biases? So we're going to take a few minutes. We're going to do this. We're going to take about 7 minutes. Actually, we're going to do 6 minutes because we're running out of time and I don't want to take you over. And then just meet in groups, work on workbook page 14 to talk about this. So what can we do? What can our role as managers and as team leaders do to help address these biases, prevent them, and check ourselves, right? Hold each other accountable. So Marinda will give me the thumbs up when she's ready. No problem, Susie. You can catch the rest of the recording and we will see you tomorrow.
All set, all done?
All right.
Okay, there you go.
We'll see you in 6 minutes. Perfect. Everyone's trickling back in. Yay, we're all back. Sorry we had to cut that a little short because we are short on time. And I don't want to lose the momentum that we have around this. But in the chat, what were some of the key ideas you had? It could be around hiring, who you invite to meetings. If you could just drop that in the chat, that'd be super helpful. And remember, the whole thing is, so it's not just about being aware about the bias, but it's also helping others in our team and organizations be aware of it and address it. And there's a lot that can be done about this. And most of the tools and techniques we will cover in this workshop will work to override these biases. If you consider everyone as an individual and give everyone a chance. Think back to situational leadership. Not one style fits every person, but they're basing your style or bias. Okay, so someone could be very confrontational or not easy to work with, but we cannot write them off. So keep this in mind as you work through the next few days. And I will see you tomorrow, same time, 10 a.m. As you can see, we have a lot going on, a lot to cover. So we will start promptly on time. Thank you for those that stay put. So creating open and supportive spaces where people can be honest and share their experiences. And then what else? Just the hiring practices as well. And then before you leave, we do have homework for tomorrow. If you can look at page 17 of your workbook, this is about your own personal reflection, and we'll be using that in tomorrow's lesson. Okay. So thank you all so much. 1 minute over. Yes, we weren't too bad. And we will reconvene tomorrow. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to stay after. If not, I will see you tomorrow. Happy
Thank
Thursday,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank